It started on a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where sunlight filters through the blinds just enough to remind you that life can still be peaceful if you let it. I had just finished my coffee and was heading out to trim the hedges when I noticed the envelope tucked neatly under my doormat. The white paper stood out against the dark slate, printed in bold block letters, Homeowners Association Notice. I sighed before even picking it up. I'd lived in this neighborhood for only 3 months, and already I had a feeling the HOA was going to be more trouble than it was worth. The envelope was heavy, the kind that feels official before you even open it. Inside was a 2-page letter, dense with self-importance. It stated that I was in violation of community property standards for unauthorized landscaping modifications. My supposed crime: replacing the scraggly, half-dead shrubs the previous owner left behind with neat boxwoods and a few roses. I stared at the letter, half amused and half annoyed. I'd seen overzealous HOAs before, but this one seemed to take pettiness to an art form. The letter gave me 7 days to restore the property to its original approved condition or face a fine of $250 per day. I couldn't help but laugh. Original approved condition: the old shrubs had been brown, brittle, and mostly dead. Apparently, mediocrity was a neighborhood standard. I folded the letter, slipped it back into the envelope, and decided to handle it in person. There was no point in getting angry over paper threats. When I arrived at the HOA office, if you could call it that, it was a small room attached to the clubhouse, with a table, a printer, and a woman who looked like she'd been waiting all week to scold someone. Her name tag read Linda P., HOA president. She didn't even look up when I entered, just motioned toward a chair like a teacher calling a late student to the front of the class. "Mr. Daniels," she began, her tone brisk and practiced, "I assume you received the notice regarding your landscaping violation." I nodded. "I did. That's why I'm here. I'd like to understand how replacing dying plants violates any rule." Linda pursed her lips. "All exterior modifications must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee. You failed to submit a request." "I didn't realize planting healthy shrubs counted as a modification," I replied evenly. "The rulebook you gave me said significant structural changes or color alterations required approval. I don't see how this qualifies." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Rules are rules, Mr. Daniels. If we make exceptions, everyone will think they can do what they please." The way she said it, like the entire neighborhood would crumble into chaos if someone planted a rosebush, was almost funny. Almost. I kept my voice calm. "Then perhaps the rules should be applied with common sense. I'll be happy to bring this up at the next board meeting." She smiled then, but not kindly. "Of course, but I should warn you, Mr. Daniels, disputes often lead to additional fines if the board determines the homeowner is non-compliant during review." A threat. Neat, polished, and delivered with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the power. I thanked her, stood up, and left without another word. On the walk home, I couldn't help but shake my head. I'd dealt with bureaucrats all my life, some worse than this, but rarely had I encountered someone so intoxicated by their own tiny kingdom. By Monday, I received another letter. This one was marked urgent in red. Apparently, a neighbor complaint had been filed stating that I was seen damaging HOA property by digging on common ground. I realized what they were referring to: the narrow strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street, which every homeowner in the subdivision maintained. It wasn't technically HOA property, but that didn't stop them from claiming it when convenient. That same evening, as I was trimming the roses, a security guard clearly hired by the HOA pulled up in a golf cart. He stepped out, clipboard in hand, and started taking photos of my front yard. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Just documenting a reported violation, sir," he said without looking up. "Reported by whom?" "Can't disclose that." HOA policy. I could feel my patience thinning. "Well, make sure you get my good side," I said dryly. "I wouldn't want the committee to think I look uncooperative." He didn't reply, just finished taking pictures and drove off. I stood there in disbelief, the absurdity of it all hanging in the evening air. They were really trying to build a case over a few rose bushes. I wondered how far they were willing to push it. The answer came 3 days later. I returned home from court, my real job to find 2 police cruisers parked in front of my house. My stomach tightened. The officers were standing near my driveway, talking to Linda and a few board members. As soon as I pulled in, one officer approached my car. "Sir, are you James Daniels?" "Yes, I am." "What's this about?" "We received a report of trespassing and property damage. The HOA president here claims you've been altering community property without authorization." I glanced at Linda, who crossed her arms triumphantly, clearly expecting me to protest or panic. Instead, I took a slow breath and spoke evenly. "Officers, would you mind if we step inside to discuss this? I'd like to show you some documents." Inside, I pulled out my property deed and a copy of the subdivision's boundary map. I pointed to the exact section of land where the shrubs were planted. "You'll see that the property line extends 2 feet past the sidewalk. That means the ground in question is, in fact, mine." The younger officer looked a bit uncomfortable. "Well, that clears up a lot," he admitted. "It sounds like a civil dispute, not a criminal matter." Linda, red-faced, started sputtering. "He's lying. That land belongs to the association." The senior officer shook his head. "Ma'am, unless you have evidence to the contrary, this isn't a police issue." I watched as they left, Linda's expression somewhere between rage and disbelief. She glared at me as if I'd cheated her out of something precious. When the cruisers pulled away, she marched up to my door. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You can't hide behind technicalities forever." I didn't bother replying. I simply closed the door and exhaled slowly. The irony was almost too much. Linda had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just some homeowner she could bully with bylaws and letters. By day, I sat on the bench in the county courthouse, presiding over cases just like this one: property disputes, HOA overreach, petty power struggles dressed up as law. As I stood by the window, watching her storm off, I realized this wasn't over. The HOA wasn't going to back down, not after their little stunt failed. But I wasn't about to either. They wanted to play by the book fine. I knew the book better than they ever would. The letter on my doorstep that morning had started a war I never asked for, but one I was more than prepared to finish. And as the sun dipped below the rooftops of our pristine little community, I couldn't help but smile just a little. The HOA wanted a fight, and for once, I was looking forward to it. The community center was packed that evening, every chair filled, every whisper buzzing with anticipation. Word had spread quickly after the incident with the police. Apparently, I was now the neighborhood troublemaker, the man who challenged authority. The HOA board sat at the front behind a long folding table, their nameplates glinting under the fluorescent lights. Linda occupied the center seat like a queen on a plastic throne, her expression taut with self-importance. I took a seat near the back, calm and silent, a small smile hiding the fact that I was already several steps ahead of them. The meeting began with the usual formalities: the treasurer's report, upcoming events, reminders about recycling bins, but I could feel the tension building. Every few minutes, Linda's gaze darted toward me. When they reached the new business portion, her lips curled slightly. Next on the agenda, she announced, is the violation case concerning Mr. James Daniels of Lot 43. The room stirred. Some neighbors turned to look at me, curious or judgmental, others simply looked away, uncomfortable. Linda cleared her throat and began reading from a printed statement. Mr. Daniels has repeatedly violated community property regulations by altering common grounds without approval. Despite multiple warnings, he has refused to comply. The board will now vote on whether to impose escalating fines and potential legal action. Her tone was sharp, practiced, and entirely performative. I could tell she'd been waiting for this moment, the chance to publicly humiliate me. I raised my hand, and she reluctantly gestured for me to speak. Before you vote, I said evenly, I'd like to clarify a few things. First, the land in question is not common property, it's part of my deeded lot, as confirmed by county records. Second, I have made no alterations beyond basic maintenance and landscaping. And third, calling the police on a homeowner without verifying property lines is not only reckless but legally questionable. A murmur rippled through the room. I could see a few heads nodding, especially from neighbors who had probably had their own run-ins with the HOA. Linda's jaw tightened. Mr. Daniels, this meeting is not a courtroom. The board makes decisions based on our governing documents, not personal interpretations. I smiled faintly. Then perhaps your governing documents need an update. They seem to confuse common sense with control. A few people chuckled quietly, which only made Linda's cheeks flush deeper. She banged her gavel against the table. Order. If you continue to disrupt this meeting, you'll be asked to leave. Of course, I said, leaning back. But before that happens, I'd like to make one more point. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, setting it on the table beside me. I took the liberty of reviewing your bylaws and the county's HOA compliance records. It seems your board hasn't updated its charter in over 7 years. That means any amendments you've made since 2018 are technically unenforceable, including the landscaping approval clause. The room went silent. The treasurer shifted uncomfortably, flipping through her binder as if hoping to find proof I was wrong. Linda, on the other hand, looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. That's absurd, she snapped. Our attorney approved every change. Really? I asked calmly. Because according to the county clerk's office, there's no record of any attorney-signed amendments since your last renewal filing. You might want to double-check before you fine anyone else. Now the murmurs weren't whispers, they were open conversations. People began turning to one another, asking questions, wondering how long the board had been operating without proper authority. The man next to me muttered, I always thought those new parking rules seemed shady. Another woman whispered, I got fined for painting my shutters beige instead of sand. Maybe I should ask for my money back. Linda slammed her gavel again. Enough. This meeting is not for personal grievances. But the tone of the room had shifted, and she could feel it. Her control was slipping. A board member named Mark, a middle-aged man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, cleared his throat. Linda, if what Mr. Daniels is saying is true, maybe we should. Don't you start, she snapped. We will handle this internally. I stood, gathering my folder. I think you should, yes. Because if it's not handled properly, it becomes a county matter. And trust me, the county doesn't look kindly on HOAs enforcing expired bylaws. I paused for a moment, then added quietly, especially when they misuse law enforcement to intimidate residents. There was a weight in the air after that, a tension that didn't break even when Linda tried to move on to the next topic. The rest of the meeting was chaos, neighbors talking over each other, board members arguing quietly among themselves, and Linda desperately trying to regain control. I didn't need to stay any longer. I made my point. As I stepped outside, the evening air felt cool and clean, a relief after the stifling tension of that fluorescent room. A few neighbors followed me out, curious and cautious. One older man, a retired engineer named Peter, approached with a nod. "You handled that well," he said. "Most people around here just give in to her." "I don't like bullies," I replied simply. He chuckled. "You and me both. She's been running this HOA like her personal empire for years. Maybe it's about time someone stood up to her." "Maybe," I said. "But standing up isn't always enough. You have to know where to hit." Peter smiled knowingly. "Something tells me you do." That night, back home, I reviewed every document I had: HOA bylaws, meeting minutes, correspondence, even emails they accidentally copied me on. It didn't take long to spot the patterns: inflated fines, selective enforcement, and unrecorded financial transfers labeled as maintenance reserves. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. There were thousands of dollars unaccounted for, and signatures that didn't match between versions of the same amendment. It was more than incompetence, it was fraud. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. It all made sense now. Linda's aggression wasn't about shrubs or rules, it was about control, and the fear of anyone pulling back the curtain. She wasn't just running a homeowners association, she was running a racket. And now, she'd gone after the wrong person. The next morning, I called a friend at the county records office, someone I'd worked with on oversight cases before. I explained the situation briefly and asked her to verify the charter records. She called back an hour later. "You were right," she said. "Their last valid filing expired in 2018. Anything after that is unenforceable." "Want me to forward the documentation?" "Yes," I replied. "And one more thing, send me the list of HOAs flagged for compliance audits. I think you can add this one to the list." When the email arrived, I saved every file and printed copies. I wasn't sure yet how far I'd take it, but I knew one thing for certain: Linda had started this by trying to embarrass me in front of my neighbors. Now it was her turn to stand in front of someone with real authority and explain herself. As I watched the neighborhood from my front porch that evening, everything looked deceptively peaceful. The lawns were neat, the trees trimmed, the air quiet except for the sound of sprinklers. But beneath that calm surface, something was shifting. The board's power was cracking, and people were beginning to see it. For years, Linda had ruled through fear and fines. Now, she'd have to answer to something much bigger than her committee. And for the first time since I'd moved in, I actually started to like this place. The following week began quietly, almost eerily so. After the chaos of the board meeting, the neighborhood had fallen into an uneasy calm, the kind that comes right before a storm. No letters appeared under my door, no golf carts lingered in front of my house, and no one from the HOA had the courage to confront me directly. But I could feel the tension pulsing beneath the surface. People who used to wave politely when walking their dogs now slowed down, curious but cautious, unsure if they should say hello or stay out of it altogether. I didn't blame them. In places like this, loyalty often shifted with the wind, and right now, that wind was swirling hard. I spent my mornings in chambers, going through case files, but my mind kept drifting back to the neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on me. I dealt with real legal disputes every day, yet the battle brewing on my own street was somehow more personal. I had seen enough of these HOA power plays to know they rarely ended with reason. Still, I had no intention of backing down. The evidence I had gathered over the past week wasn't just strong, it was damning. Missing funds, unfiled amendments, and clear violations of county oversight regulations. If I were sitting on the bench and these documents crossed my desk, I'd have ordered a full audit without hesitation. On Thursday afternoon, as I returned home from the courthouse, a thick envelope was waiting in my mailbox. No return address, just the HOA's logo in the corner. I opened it right there on the sidewalk. Inside was a notice of hearing stating that I was to appear before the Special Disciplinary Committee for continued defiance and public disruption. The date was set for Saturday morning. The tone of the letter was almost theatrical, full of legal-sounding phrases clearly written by someone who didn't understand law at all. I almost laughed. They were doubling down, even after being caught operating outside their authority. Either they were desperate or unbelievably foolish. Maybe both. Saturday came quickly. I decided to attend the so-called hearing, partly out of curiosity and partly because I wanted to end this on my terms. The meeting was held in the same community center as before, but this time the air felt heavier. There were only a dozen people inside, mostly board members and a few loyal followers who seemed more interested in gossip than governance. Linda sat at the head of the table, wearing a smug smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The others looked uneasy, glancing between her and me as if unsure which side to stand on. "Mr. Daniels," Linda began, her voice overly sweet, "thank you for joining us. We're here today to address your continued non-compliance and your inappropriate behavior during our last meeting." I placed a folder on the table and met her gaze. "Before we start, I'd like to clarify something. Are you holding this meeting under the authority of your current charter?" She hesitated, just for a second, before saying, "Of course we are. This is an official HOA proceeding." "Interesting," I said. "Because according to county records, your charter expired 7 years ago. Meaning this meeting has no legal standing. Any decisions made here are null and void." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the board members, Mark, the same man who tried to speak up at the last meeting, looked especially nervous. "Linda," he said quietly, "maybe we should postpone this until..." She cut him off sharply. "No. We're proceeding as planned." I leaned forward slightly. "You might want to reconsider that. Because as of this morning, the county's HOA Compliance Office has received a formal complaint regarding this board's activities, complete with documentation of your expired filings and unaccounted financial transactions. They'll be opening an investigation next week." The color drained from her face. You did what?" "I did my duty," I replied calmly. "As a homeowner, and as an officer of the court. You tried to weaponize authority you don't legally possess. You threatened residents, misused funds, and even involved law enforcement under false pretenses. That's not just unethical, it's potentially criminal." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. No one dared speak. The treasurer was staring down at the table, her hands trembling slightly. Mark rubbed his forehead, muttering something under his breath. Even Linda seemed to have lost her usual confidence. She opened her mouth as if to argue but found no words. "You think you can scare me?" she finally managed, her voice brittle. "We'll take this to court." I almost smiled. "Please do. I'll make sure it lands on the right docket." For a long moment, she just stared at me, as if trying to figure out how everything had unraveled so quickly. Then she grabbed her papers, stood abruptly, and stormed out of the room. No one followed her. The meeting ended without ceremony. The board members dispersed quietly, avoiding eye contact. The reign of the HOA Queen had just ended, not with a bang, but with a retreat. Outside, the air was bright and still, the kind of calm that feels almost cleansing. I walked slowly back to my house, passing a few neighbors along the way. One woman, who had always avoided confrontation, gave me a small, grateful nod. Another man clapped me on the shoulder and said, "About time someone put her in her place." Word was spreading fast. I didn't need to say anything, the truth was already doing the work for me. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the street lights flickered on, I sat on my porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the quiet neighborhood breathe again. It felt different now, lighter, freer, as if an invisible weight had been lifted. The roses I'd planted months ago were blooming beautifully, untouched and unapologetic. I thought about the irony of it all, how something as small as a letter about landscaping had spiraled into an all-out war, one that revealed far more than anyone expected. Later that night, I received an email from the county's compliance office confirming that an audit had officially been opened. They thanked me for the documentation and said an investigator would be contacting residents for statements. I closed my laptop with a deep, satisfied breath. Justice, I knew, sometimes moved slowly, but it always arrived eventually. A week later, Linda's house went dark. The blinds stayed closed, her car disappeared, and a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. No one was surprised. Rumor had it she'd resigned from the board and was under investigation for financial misconduct. The HOA was restructured shortly after, with Mark appointed as interim president. The new board held an open meeting, invited everyone to participate, and promised transparency going forward. For the first time, it felt like a community instead of a fiefdom. Standing by my window one evening, I looked out at the calm, well-kept street. The lawns were green, the sidewalks clear, and the air still carried that faint scent of roses. I thought about how strange life could be, the way a simple act of standing up for yourself could ripple outward, changing more than just your own circumstances. The HOA had tried to make me a villain, to isolate me through fear and intimidation, but in the end, all they'd done was expose themselves. Sometimes justice doesn't need a courtroom or a gavel. Sometimes it just needs someone willing to say enough. And as I sat there, the last light of day fading behind the rooftops, I couldn't help but smile. They had wanted to make an example of me. In a way, they had succeeded, just not in the way they expected.